And this is what can happen in the ummah. So we'll go back to Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And so he says, this is why we find that the Sahaba, وَلِهَذَا كَانُوا فِي الْحَنِيفِيَّةِ السَّمْحَةِ عَلَى أَحْدِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم, that we find that in the time of the Sahaba, they were upon al-Hanifiyya as-Samha. They were upon the pure, upright religion. And during the time of Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu, we see that they were upon this way. They were upon this way. And they were in the time of Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu in a situation better than they were in the time of Umar radiyallahu anhu. And then what happened is in the time of Umar radiyallahu anhu, because of some sins that began to appear, then as the Shaykh says, أوجبت اجتهاد الإمام في نوع من التشديد عليهم. So because the people began to now commit sins which weren't there in the time of Abu Bakr or in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, now by way of the Imam, by way of the ruler, a type of severity and harshness was imposed upon them by way of the ijtihad of the Imam. So for example, they were prohibited of making the mut'atul hajj, the hajj tamattu, they were prohibited from doing that. And likewise, that if they pronounced divorce 3 times, it was treated as being one. Right? So this now is some degree of severity imposed upon the people by way of the ijtihad of the Imam as a punishment for some of the sins that began to appear in the people that weren't there before. Right? And Shaykh al-Islam continues and he says, likewise, the severity of the punishment for drinking intoxicants, it was intensified and made more severe in the time of Umar bin al-Khattab. And in that time, he says that Abu Ubaidah was the most obedient and the most pious and righteous in that time. And Umar radiallahu anhu used to incline towards him and submit to whatever he used to say and comply in a way that he wouldn't listen to anybody else because of the piety of Abu Ubaidah. However, in that time, some of the masail, in some of the issues, such as to do with inheritance, they became obscure. And then the people began to dispute in some of these issues of inheritance, right? Despite these differences, there was still unity amongst them. And they used to accept the ijtihad of others. Okay, so I want you to think about what's happening here. Ibn Taymiyyah is explaining, we have the time of the Messenger of Allah, time of the Sahaba, most pious, most righteous. There's no shackles, there's no burdens, there's no hidden knowledge. There's nothing of knowledge hidden from anybody. Right? This continues in the time of Abu Bakr. Then in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, some ma'asi starts to appear among the people, as people doing things, sins, maybe in private, in secret. They are doing things that weren't there before. As a result of those sins, a number of things happen by the wisdom of Allah. From them is that Allah Azza wa Jal brings hardship upon the people, burdens upon the people by way of the ijtihad of the Imam. So in this instance, Umar bin al-Khattab, he made had some tashdeed in some of the rulings, like the divorce, like the doing hajj with tamattu, and the punishment for alcohol. So there's some tashdeed, but this is justice from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the servants. And he uses the Imam to mete out that justice. And that ijtihad of that Imam would be correct. That's one thing that happens. The other thing which happens is that knowledge now starts to become obscure. There are some areas of knowledge that it now becomes hidden from the ulama, from the scholars, so that differences start to appear now in certain issues. In this instance, it was the issues of inheritance. But despite this deficiency appearing in this time period, alongside this there was still general unity, right? So there wasn't separation between the hearts, there was still unity, there was i'tilaf, there was togetherness, and so on and so forth. And everyone would accept, okay, that's your ijtihad, and that's my ijtihad. So this is how the situation was. However, then he continues, then there was in the time at the end of the Khilafah of Uthman radiyallahu anhu. In this time what happened is that this initial kind of obscurity in the knowledge and small differences, this now began to increase. And as people become more engrossed in the world, at the wassu' fi dunya, and various other types of actions began to occur which weren't in the time of Umar. And as a result of these things, now some tanafur, some kind of aversion began to appear in the hearts. Right? Aversion began to appear in the hearts. And until this aversion began to continue and events escalated, and they eventually culminated in the assassination of Uthman radiyallahu anhu. And Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in the Quran, وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْكُمْ خَاصَّةً. Fear the tribulation which does not afflict only the ones who are the oppressors amongst you. So Shaykh al-Islam says, meaning that this fitna لا تصيب الظالم فقط بل تصيب الظالم والساكت عن نهيه عن الظلم. This tribulation which now comes and engulfs people, it engulfs both the oppressor and the one who remained silent from the oppression and did not end the oppression. And just as the Messenger of Allah, he said in the hadith, إِنَّ النَّاسِ إِذَا رَأُوا الْمُنْكَرَ فَلَمْ يُغَيِّرُوهُ أَوْشَكَ أَنْ يَعُمَّهُمُ اللَّهُ بِعِقَابٍ مِنْهُ. That when the people see evil and they do not change it, then it is feared that Allah is going to generalize the punishment to all of them. So now we have the situation becoming worse. Now what do you see? Now you see more hardships, more difficulty. Now there's actual division between the hearts, and then there is difficulty and burdens. What's the asl of all of this? It is the sins of the servants, the dhunub of the ibad. Then he continues and he says, then this became a cause of many of the tayyibat, things which are lawful, they were prevented from them. And then they began to dispute more about these issues. For example, about the Hajj, tamattu'. And these types of disagreements were not there before in the time of Umar. It was greater than the time in the time of Umar. And so some people now began to actually prohibit it absolutely. No, you cannot do it absolutely, such as Ibn Zubayr radiyallahu anhu. And another group, they denied that it had been, completely, they denied its abrogation or revocation, like the Bani Umayyah and other than them. And then they began to actually punish the one who would prevent the people from doing it. And another group of people began to obligate it, right? So now we see all these differences becoming greater amongst the people, and to the level that it reaches this degree. And all of them, as Shaykh al-Islam says, none of them actually intended to oppose the Messenger of Allah. So these differences which are now appearing, no one is intending to oppose the Messenger of Allah. But what's happened is the ilm has been hidden, made obscure. That's why these ijtihads arise, because the ilm has been made obscure. And this is a result of sins which appear. So when the sins appear, ilm becomes hidden until even among the ulama. As a result of that ilm being hidden, there are ijtihadat which are made, which lead to differences firstly, and secondly to hardships and burdens upon the people that the Sharia did not come with, right? So the messenger has not put burdens on the people. The Sharia has removed the burdens, right? But when you begin to disobey Allah, then you start imposing the burdens upon yourself, right? So the Sahaba was spared from these types of things, but they fall upon the ummah by way of their sin and their disobedience. So then Shaykh al-Islam mentions the hadith that all of this is because of what happened of sins. And then he says, likewise, the hadith when the messenger of Allah, when he came and he said, I came to inform you of Laylatul Qadr. Then two men began to dispute with each other, began to argue. So because of that argumentation, the knowledge of what night it was raised, and it was not revealed to the ummah. So this now is the removal of knowledge because of this disputation that the people fell into. So then what is the maqsood? What is the intent behind all of this? The intent behind all of this, as the Shaykh says here on page 160, وَالْمَقْصُودُ هُنَا أَنَّ مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ مَا يَكُونُ سَبَبًا لِخَفَاءِ الْعِلْمِ النَّافِعِ أو بعده بل يكون سببا لنسيان ما علم ولاشتباه الحق بالباطل تقع الفتن بسبب ذلك. He says, what is the intent here? The intent is that from the sins are those which become a reason for knowledge being hidden, beneficial knowledge, or some of it being hidden. Rather, it can be even a cause of knowledge actually being forgotten. So not even hidden. The ummah, among the people, are those who will forget this knowledge. And then when the truth becomes confused with falsehood, this now is when fitan, when tribulations start to appear. And then Shaykh al-Islam mentions an ayah from the Quran where he speaks about Adam alayhi salam, where he's told to go and eat from the garden and not to approach this particular tree, otherwise you will be from the wrongdoers. And then فَأَزَلَّهُمَ الشَّيْطَانِ عَنْهَا, then shaitan, he basically misled them from it, and he made them to be expelled from paradise. So here, every enmity which is in the offspring of Adam, and every trial, every dislikable thing, until the establishment of the hour, its reason is al-dhunub wa ma'siyatul Rabb ta'ala. Right? So basically every calamity from the time of Adam until people enter the hellfire, then the reason for that is the dhunub. Then he says, فَالْإِنسَانِ إِذَا كَانَ مُقِيمًا عَلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ بَاطِنًا وَظَاهِرًا كَانَ فِي نَعِيمِ الْإِيمَانِ وَالْعِلْمِ وَوَارِدٌ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ جِهَاتِهِ وَهُوَ فِي جَنَّةِ الدُّنْيَا. So basically, whenever a servant, he is established upon Allah's obedience inwardly and outwardly, it's as if he is in the bliss of iman and knowledge, and it comes to him from every direction while he's in the world. Just like in the hadith in which it occurs that when you pass by the Riyadh of Jannah, then sit and take benefit. And it was said, what is the Riyadh of Jannah? He said, the Majalisul Dhikr. Right? So when there are gatherings of remembrance and you pass by them, sit and take benefit. So a believer finds great benefit in his heart and pleasure in these types of gatherings. So basically, if you obey Allah, you will feel the pleasure in the heart. And then he says that every time there is love of Allah in the heart and His remembrance and obedience, then the heart will be attached to the higher company and he will be lofty, so long as he is like this. But when he commits a sin, فَإِذَا أَذْنَبَ حَبَتَ قَلْبُهُ إِلَى أَسْفَلِ فَلَا يَزَالُ فِي هُبُوطٍ مَا دَامَ كَذَلِكَ. So when he commits a sin, now he falls from that status and he never ceases continuing to fall as long as he's in that state of sin. And then there will occur between him and between his likes enmity. So between the sinners there will appear enmity. And if Allah intends goodness for them, He will guide them to make tawbah and to do righteous actions until they are upright again. So this is how Shaykh al-Islam explains that why is it that we have burdens and shackles even though the Sharia did not come with burdens and shackles? Why is it that we find that as we see in the ijtihads of some of the scholars, or in some of the madahib, for example, Shaykh al-Islam says, another example of this, some of the people believe that you cannot shorten in a journey. You can't shorten the prayer in a journey. So he says you must pray for it in a journey. Or someone says, well, you cannot break the fast upon a journey, right? And this is not because they intend to oppose Allah and His Messenger. This is from their ijtihad. But this ijtihad itself brings a burden upon the people, which is actually a punishment for them. So when they fast while they are on a journey, believing it is unlawful for them to break the fast, even though this is not what the Sharia came with, but they believe that it is unlawful, this now is a shackle imposed, and you are being punished by going through the physical hardship of fasting on a journey. But as Shaykh al-Islam says, that perhaps this will be an expiation. So even though you are going through this hardship because of your disobedience, then this will be an expiation for you. But this now is a burden you've imposed upon yourself, right? So the intent here is that in the Sharia of Allah, there is no shackles, there are no burdens. Things which we do out of forgetfulness or khata are forgiven. But there are some instances where because of sin, Allah Azza wa Jal, He removes these things and we impose difficulties and burdens and shackles upon ourselves until, even by way of a ruler or by way of a scholar, his ijtihad, right, there can be some degree of severity and hardship brought upon us. And that's why Shaykh al-Islam says here, he's speaking about this issue and he's speaking about some of the madahib and they hold certain views, like as we said, the one who believes you must pray 4 rak'ahs on journey, or that you cannot break the fast upon a journey. And we can now apply this to many of the ijtihadat that are found amongst the scholars and the madahib, that all of this brings to a certain degree, it is hardship and difficulty, right? And that's because of disobedience to Allah and His Messenger. In fact, Shaykh al-Islam says, even he says, وَقَدْ يُبْتَلُونَ بِمُطَاعٍ يلزمهم ذلك فيكون آثارا وأغلالا من جهة مطاعهم مثل حاكم ومفت وناظر وقف وأمير ينسب ذلك إلى الشرع. He says, sometimes they can be put to trial by one whom they obey, who makes binding upon them certain things so that it becomes a burden upon them and shackles upon them, such as from a ruler or a mufti, or someone who's in charge of a waqf, or an amir who makes an ijtihad. He ascribes that to the legislation because he believes it is from the legislation when it is not. And the one whom they obey, he doesn't have the knowledge to know that it is against the Sharia. This now could be a punishment upon those people for their sin. So now this amir, this hakim, this mufti, whatever knowledge was hidden from him, so he made an ijtihad, he imposed it upon his people. This now is a punishment upon them because of their sins. And he doesn't have to intend their punishment, because oppression is of two types. You have a dhalim who wants to punish the subjects, right? This is one situation. But then you have another one who doesn't intend to punish his subjects, but due to absence of knowledge or due to an ijtihad, he takes a course which ends up them being punished. And he gives an example. For example, he says that an amir might be leading the people on a journey, and there could be this direction in the journey where there are pastures, where there is things that they can benefit from, but he, due to the absence of his knowledge, he takes them in that direction in which there's no pastures, and they come to markets where the prices are very expensive, and so basically they are now harmed. And that's because the absence of knowledge of the amir in these issues. So here he didn't intend to commit dhulm upon the people, but the people are punished by way of the ijtihad, in this case of the Amir, but it could be a Hakim, could be a Mufti, it could be, as Shaykh al-Islam says. And so all of these affairs, what is the basis or the reason for all of these affairs? It is the sins and disobedience of mankind. And we see from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, this indicates, as Shaykh al-Islam says, that this is the asal of every single trial and tribulation, from the time of Adam being expelled from paradise to the time that people enter the hellfire. Every single tribulation, the asal is sin, to the degree that this sin can even lead to knowledge being hidden, and masail which might have been very, very clear and apparent at one time in the ummah, they now become obscure and hidden, as a result of which controversy appears amongst the Muslims. And this we can see happening today in many kind of issues, many instances where, due to the absence of ilm or absence of clarity, maybe there's ijtihadat which are made by the rulers, by some of the scholars, and this leads to hardship and difficulty upon the people. Not that it's intended, not that they intend to do dhulm, but because of the obscurity of the ilm. And if this happened in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, how can it not happen in this time? If this happened in the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, how can it not happen in this time? Right? With them in the obscurity of like certain masail. And then we end up being punished and put to trial by way of some of the things which come from, the muta', whether it is a hakim or mufti or whatever it might be. So this is a tremendous insight from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, explaining some of the different ways that we bring burdens and shackles upon ourselves, even though the Sharia has released us from those burdens and those shackles. So coming now back to Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, the effect of sins, the effect of ma'asi, the effect of disobedience. I want to read a beautiful passage where he mentions, this is in Al-Fawaid, and this, we want to connect all of this together, these ayat at the end of Surat al-Baqarah, that this dua that was answered for the Sahaba, do not call us to account for forgetfulness and error, do not impose upon us burdens, do not impose upon us what we cannot bear, pardon us, forgive us. This was answered for the Sahaba. But if we want it to be answered for ourselves, then we have to make that taslim, id'an, just like the Sahaba did. Otherwise, we will have all these trials and these tribulations. So from what Ibn al-Qayyim said, rahimahullah, he mentions the effects of ma'asi, right? So the effects of sins are so many, not just what we've discussed here about the tribulation coming from the knowledge being hidden and shackles being imposed from the rulers, for example, or for other than them. He says, from the effects of sins, قِلَّةُ التَّوْفِيقِ, that you are given little success in your affairs. وَفَسَادُ الرَّأِي, your opinion becomes corrupted. Your views that you hold in issues in the world, in the dunya, even in religious affairs, this now corruption starts to enter your actual views, your opinion. وَخَفَاءُ الْحَقِّ, the truth now starts becoming hidden to you and obscure to you. وَفَسَادُ الْقَلْبِ, and the corruption of the heart. وَخُمُولُ الذِّكْر, and then you find it very hard and difficult and burdensome to make dhikr of Allah. It's very heavy, very difficult. وَإِدَاءَةُ الْوَقْتِ, and the wastage of your time. There's little barakah in your time. وَنَفْرَةُ الْخَلْقِ, you find that the people generally, there's aversion towards you. وَالْوَحْشَ بَيْنَ الْعَبْدِ وَبَيْنَ رَبِّهِ, that there's like a strangeness that you start to feel between yourself and between your Lord. وَمَنْعِ إِجَابَةِ الدُّعَاء, your dua is not being answered. وَقَسْوَةُ الْقَلْبِ, you find your heart becoming hard, and you find it it's hard to start feeling emotions in your heart of like fear and awe, and your heart can't melt very easily despite it hearing things, admonition. He says, وَمَحْقُ الْبَرَكَةِ فِي الرِّزْقِ وَالْعُمَرِ. The blessing that you have in your sustenance, your provision, and in your life now starts slowly being erased. وَحِرْمَانُ الْعِلْمِ. Knowledge is prevented. As we mentioned earlier on, this is one of the ways that knowledge becomes prevented. وَلِبَاسُ الظُّلِّ. Now humiliation starts to you start being clothed in humiliation. وَإِهَانَةُ الْعَدُوِّ. Your enemy is able to humiliate you. So you no longer have, like, the enemy doesn't fear you anymore. They are able to humiliate you, look down upon you. وَضَيِّقُ الصَّدْرِ. Your heart becomes narrow. وَالْإِبْتِلَاءِ بِقُرَنَاءِ السُّوءِ الَّذِينَ يُفْسِدُونَ الْقَلْبِ وَيُضَيِّعُونَ الْوَقْتِ. That you are put to trial with evil companionship. They corrupt your heart and they waste your time. And وَطُولُ الْحَمْ وَالْغَمْ. You start to have anxiety and worry and grief, and this starts preoccupying your mind. وَضَنْقَ الْمَعِيشَةِ. And you start having a narrow, constricted livelihood. And وَكَسْفُ الْبَالِ. That now you start having a gloominess, there's a gloominess around you and about you. And he says that disobedience تتولد من المعصية والغفلة عن ذكر الله كما يتولد الزرع عن الماء. He says that all of these things that Ibn al-Qayyim has mentioned, these 15-20 things, they are born and they are produced and they are generated from sinfulness and heedlessness from Allah's remembrance, in the same way that vegetation is born out of water. So just as you see from the earth, all sorts of things spring out of the earth, plants, vegetables, even weeds and things like that, just through the water, then in the same way these calamities that is mentioned here, they are born out of sin. So as the sin comes into the heart, through the limbs, then all these things automatically start to be produced that you've heard in this list. And likewise, in the same way that the fire burns, right? The fire burns, when the fire burns. This is how these things are produced. Then he says, the way that obedience, the similitude of how obedience gives birth to fruits and grows, is like the example of how obedience is like the example of a seed. You plant it, and then out of it comes a tree. From that tree, it then bears fruits. You then take the fruit, you eat the fruit, and then you once again plant the seed you took out of the fruit. Multiple seeds now. And then you plant the seeds, and then once again, now it's multiple times more than what you actually started with. And this is something that you can see. For example, you could take an apple or an onion, a seed, just a seed. You plant the seed, out of that comes the tree. There's hundreds of apples. You take each of the seeds from those apples, you plant it again, and now it just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies, and it becomes innumerable for you to count the actual fruits. So obedience gives birth to itself and increases itself in the same way. But also sinfulness and disobedience does the same thing. He says, وَكَذَلِكَ تَدَاعَ الْمَعَاصِي. Sinfulness is exactly the same thing. So let the intelligent person, let him think over this similitude, let him think about this similitude, because فَمِنْ ثَوَابِ الْحَسَنَةِ الْحَسَنَ بَعْدَهَا وَمِنْ عُقُوبَةِ السَّيِّئَةِ السَّيِّئَةِ بَعْدَهَا. Because from the reward of a good deed is a good deed that comes after it. Allah gives you tawfiq in doing more good deeds. And from the punishment of an evil deed is an evil deed after it. So you are punished by then the door being open to you for other sins. Right? So these are some of the effects of the sins upon people. And really we've come to the end of our allocated time, so we'll have to round everything off, inshallah ta'ala. So just to really, what have we taken from these ayat, from the end of Surat al-Baqarah? In fact, there are numerous virtues mentioned about these verses, and one of the virtues is that whoever recites the khawatim of al-Baqarah during the night, then they will kafatah, they will suffice him. They will be enough for him in an authentic hadith. And this is because these ayat, they comprise many, many tremendous and mighty things about the tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal. As we said, His mulk, His ilm, His mashi'ah, His rahmah, His all-encompassing knowledge, and then the virtue of the Sahaba, the submission, and how the greatness of this sharia in its mercy, in its ease, in its concession, how Allah removed the shackles from this ummah, and how He answered the dua of the Sahaba when they said, we seek your forgiveness, O our Lord. When they made those du'as, Rabbana la tu'akhidhna, to the end, each time Allah answered, fa'alt. That was for the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. So, if we want to understand why do we have shackles upon us in our religion, in our world, why do we have ikhtilafat, why do we have burdens coming to us from the direction maybe of the hakim or the mufti or whatever, upon the wisdom of Allah, right? Why do these things happen? Then there are reasons for that. It is sin, it is disobedience. The sin leads to prevention of knowledge, obscurity of knowledge, knowledge being forgotten. Through this, ijtihadat are made, through which some degree of harshness is now imposed upon us. And all of this is Allah Azza wa Jal punishing us for us not obeying Him, unlike what was present in the time of the Messenger of Allah and the time of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. So there are many, many more tremendous reflections upon this. So if we reflect upon these ayat and read these ayat, inshallah, they will increase us in our iman and make us heedful of Allah Azza wa Jal, and make us realize that if we want to have that ni'mah and that barakah that the Sahaba were given, then we have to be like them. We have to show that azimah, we have to show that himmah, to want to obey Allah and to want to make those sacrifices and to expel and remove, like we said from the speech of Ibn al-Qayyim, the khatra, then the fikra, and then the shahwa, and then the azimah. We have to stop these things from the very beginning, to stop that process from happening where we then are punished and put to trial in our world and our religion. So with that, wabillahi tawfiq, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.